Welcome to the Wellness on Tap podcast with your host, Dr. Debs Eastwood.
So I'm really looking forward to the first question.
You probably won't even notice me slipping it in because we'll just be talking.
Okay. Just like you do with the needles.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes, because you've had some of that treatment from me, haven't you?
Yes, yeah.
And you were just saying you felt more energised.
Yeah. I've had a really good, and it was interesting trying to think, well, what is it? But I have also been taking the Omega Balance Oil. So, and I delayed taking things through the summer because I thought, no, I'm fine. I am like a bee. If it's sunshiny and warm, I'm absolutely buzzing. I'm fine. But it's when it gets dark and cold and wet and no sunshine, and I'm like, can't cope with that. So, that's when I try everything. Yeah. So I didn't do my balance test until beginning of September. And so I'm not, you can do the test again after 4 months and then see how it is. But I had a shocking result. I was so shocked, really shocked. But I think it's absorption. So this is where the B12 could be helping.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have that till October, did I?
No. And that's why I offer the methyl version of B12, because there's 3 or 4 different variants of it. Because of our diets, even if we're really good with what we eat, because of the years of abuse and the environmental abuse that our guts are subject to, we often just don't absorb.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if we eat rubbish, it's even worse.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And so I offer that one because people don't methylate. People don't absorb. It's the strongest. It's a good dose, that'll last you. And I've had quite a few people that have had the injection at the beginning of the day. We've been together at an event all day.
Yeah.
And they've come back to me in the evening going, yes, I'm feeling really good. I'm normally shattered by now. And it just delights me.
Yeah. Because we can do so much, don't we? We just feel so much better when we're energised.
Yeah.
And that was the really, well, I'll talk about that later, but being ill, that you recover from the inside. And that was I learned so much through that time, really. And I haven't really talked about it a lot because I suppose it was a much deeper wound. And there were so many associations with being so chronically ill for so long. And I didn't want to be that ill person.
Yeah.
I'm the bee lady.
But we're happy to talk about it now.
Yeah.
Because you're in a much more healed place.
Yeah. And I can see the relevance of it all and that bringing everything together and how the bees do bring everything in together. So
why don't we start there then? Because the illness that you had is not something that is perhaps commonly known. I mean, it's not rare as such, but it's certainly not a common illness, is it?
No.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Yeah. Rarely diagnosed. That's the classification.
Yeah.
Much more common now. I get approached by a lot of people, not so much the people with it, but with their family members. They reach out. And that's really difficult because I remember how triggering it was when I was ill and people go, oh, I heard of somebody. I mean, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 46. So I was bedbound for 6 years before I was diagnosed. And there were so many people who'd go, oh, I've heard of this course you can do for a weekend, then you'll be fine. And it was that knowing I wasn't fixed. I knew it would take longer.
Yeah. So what happened then at the beginning? So I'm presuming you were fit and healthy beforehand.
Yeah. I mean, I was 40. I'd been a sickly child. So my growing up, I was like skinny, hypermobile, double jointed, could do crazy things with my elbows and knees and fingers. And I had asthma until I was 19. So I was on a lot of medication and I was on trials for various medication as well. But I suppose to everybody else, I would seem fit and healthy because I was always doing stuff. I was always active and I had my first business at 20, although I'd been working as an artist from the age of, my first painting I sold age 13.
Wow.
And I had my first exhibition at 16. So I was I would appear like a really healthy person, but I really struggled with, I suppose energy has always been the thing, which is ironic because I always appeared to be such an energetic person. But if I didn't watch what I'd eat, I would just stop. I used to joke that I'd be on or off.
Right. Okay. You were the light switch energy-wise.
Yeah. And so if I had something sweet for breakfast, then I would really crash. And that was what was crazy, was that realization. If I traveled somewhere and had a big fry-up breakfast, which you'd think would last all day, which now it would last me all day, but in those days, by 11 o'clock, I'd be shaking. I would just have a real crash. And so although I was healthy, I had all kinds of joint problems. I was under a rheumatologist from the age of about 11 because I had chronic pain in my wrists and ankles and my legs, which no one could figure out what it was. I'd got repetitive strain injury, which was really, really painful. And that was from painting, my career as an artist. I had gone through traumas. So a lot of people, when I first crashed at age 40, they were like, oh, it was your divorce, but that was 5 years before. And I'd moved on, I'd married again, I'd had a long time on my own. So, I had a reasonable amount of space. But then when I crashed, it was a shock, and I didn't know how to handle not being well. And I didn't know how to ask for help. My husband, Greg, he was working away when I really crashed. So I was very dependent on my friends taking the kids to school, cooking for me, people bringing food round. And already then I knew I couldn't eat wheat. And it was really difficult because I really couldn't do anything. And people would bring round a pasta bake, or they'd bring round bread. And I had to eat it because I couldn't do anything for myself. And I suppose that was when I had that first insight that I was eating healthily. I had a healthy life. Even then I was eating organic food. I was cooking everything from scratch, but I was ill, really, really ill. And it was really tough because the doctors didn't know what it was. I was too sick to go to the doctors. I mean, I was completely bedbound. I couldn't lift my head up off the pillow. We later found I had POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia, which explained why I couldn't sit up. And even being in a wheelchair was extremely uncomfortable. And I remember my husband got sent home from work. He was working in Malaysia, and he got sent back to take care of me. And he took me to the rheumatologist who'd been seeing me since I was 11. So he was almost like a family friend, I knew him. He bought my paintings, he was a customer, a friend, knew me really, really well. And to drive me there, my husband had to put the front seat almost flat. So I was flat. We had pillows because any kind of movement and my body was just shaking. And to get me out of the car, it was really difficult. And this rheumatologist, he had a clinic in his home. And we went in there, he laid me on this bed, and he, just checked all my joints and things. And said, well, can't really say what it is. And then when they got me in the car, Greg shut the door, and I heard the rheumatologist say to my husband, well, of course, in old-fashioned terms, this is just a breakdown.
Oh.
And that was awful. And then I felt so alone. Crikey. And, he took me home. And of course, my husband, he trusts what doctors say. And it was really, really difficult. I mean, my mum was a district nurse, so she was incredibly supportive. And she'd known, obviously she'd known me all my life. My boys were 9 and 11, so they were young. I couldn't take them to school. I couldn't get involved with things. And it was the spring of the last term of my eldest at primary school. So it's sports days. And it's really interesting when you suddenly go into a wheelchair. I didn't really want to be in a wheelchair, but for me, the wheelchair meant freedom. It meant I could leave the house. And trying to get a wheelchair is really challenging. You'd think when you're that ill that a wheelchair would appear, but it doesn't. We had to hire them from the Red Cross. And so, of course, it was made for big, large people. and I wasn't that large. And so it had no back support and, no real cushions. And I was tall, so my feet, it was uncomfortable having your feet on the step. And I remember Greg driving the car onto the sports field of my kids' primary school. And then it was so, any driving, I'd be shaking afterwards, and then trying to get me out of the car into the wheelchair, then pushing the wheelchair up to the finish line of the little track, sports track. And I couldn't sit in the chair, it was too uncomfortable. So we got picnic rugs out and I lay on the ground so that I could just turn my head and then watch everything. And there was people I'd known, 7, 10 years, fellow mums, and some of them couldn't talk to me, couldn't look at me, couldn't come anywhere near me because I was in a wheelchair. And that was such a shock. I mean, then you get lots of people who do, and they're fussing over you, and they're, and they're caring about you. And interestingly, there was a lot of fellow mums who were doctors. It was a nice little village primary school. And there was one of them who, when I first started feeling ill and I'd gone to the doctors and they'd suggested it might be, not fibromyalgia, but the other one where you have to go on steroids. There's a sort of a joint condition. And then once you're on steroids, you're on them for life. And my aunt had that, and I knew how damaging the steroids had been for her. So I spoke to this doctor and I said, look, they've said I'm this, and I've got like 3 days before they want to put me on the steroids. What do you think? And she just said, get a second opinion, just don't go for that straight away. So I didn't go for that. So I avoided that. Good. And then they gave me, they said, it's fibromyalgia because of all the pain I was in. And then eventually they came under the myalgic encephalomyelitis, ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. And that was really challenging because my cousin had ME for years. And this was a real self-development point in my life because I understood judgment, real judgment, because I had judged my cousin. She had been depressed. She'd had ME for years. And I'd always been as compassionate as I could be. But in my mind, she's my cousin. We grew up together. I knew her. I couldn't understand why she would want to be ill. Mm. And of course, yuppie flu and the CFS and ME, it had a bad rap. And my inner mind, my negative, nasty Paula, was going, lazy, don't want to work, don't want to be well. And so I felt that everyone who looked at me was thinking the same.
You tarred yourself with that same brush.
I did. And I realised that if you're feeling judged, it's because you judge. And that's the biggest thing, is to be able to live without judgment, really, really, really live without judgment. And then that frees you up so that you no longer feel judged. And then you can be, do, say whatever you want to do because you're not receiving the judgment that you've been sending out for years. Sure. So that was huge. But I didn't accept that diagnosis. I mean, you want a diagnosis. And this is something else that happens when you're chronically ill. So, it was going on years and years and years. And I was desperately researching to try and find out what I really had, why I was ill, what was going on with my body. And when you look up ME or CFS, it really is an umbrella for we don't know what's wrong with you. Because I would be on all these forums online and people had all kinds of different symptoms. And then there was always this movement for claiming to have an MRI scan to know if you really had myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is a swelling of the brain. And so you have this sort of hierarchy of illness within the sick people.
Oh my goodness.
And, who's had this diagnosis, who's had that, and this real anger, for being heard, being listened to, being understood about what was wrong with our bodies. And what treatments were available. And I fell ill in end of 2008, 2009, so literally as I turned 40. And the treatment available by the NICE guidelines, something I'd never heard of before, was that you could have CBT or GET. So CBT is cognitive behaviour therapy, and GET is graded exercise therapy. Okay. So you get these little printouts that give you these exercises. Bear in mind that lifting my head off the pillow was almost impossible. Moving in a car, getting out of bed, standing up and making a cup of tea.
Wasn't in your remit.
No, it wasn't. I had to have carers. We had to have carers to the house to look after me, to look after the kids. And I really was in bed. I had to lay flat. The only time I felt comfortable was laying flat. And in the early years, I had so much pain and nausea. Oh my gosh, I forgot the nausea. The nausea, I think, was the overwhelming, the most debilitating condition. You just, you want to be sick, but you can't. And you just have this nausea. So I couldn't have eye contact, couldn't look at anybody in the face. Just constantly nausea.
I think some women relate to the nausea in terms of morning sickness. I know for me, I had it with each of my 3 children until I was 16 weeks. So I know what it's like to, you open your eyes and for a second or two, you don't feel nauseous. And then,
boom,
there it is. And you fall asleep feeling nauseous.
Yeah.
Repeat for 16 weeks. Yeah, debilitating,
it
exhausting.
Is. Yeah.
So if you've got that on top of pain,
yeah,
and the POTS,
yeah,
going on, and not being diagnosed, not having an answer, which surprises me because you said that rheumatologist had been seeing you from age 11 and you'd got a lot of the characteristics of Ehlers-Danlos, with the stretchy skin, the hypermobility, being able to do funky things with your joints, which is a great party trick at school, isn't it? But not good for them. Clearly means there's something wrong.
And I was so good at yoga.
I'm not surprised.
And competitive.
I'm not surprised. I mean, why he wasn't putting that together and giving you the diagnosis, I can't criticise him, but do you know what I mean? Knowing what I know now, it's very easy to say what you know in hindsight, isn't it? But
well, the Ehlers-Danlos Society and the associations, they have a zebra as their logo. And the reason they have a zebra is because doctors hear hoof prints and think a horse. And we're the zebras.
Okay.
And so, I have an affiliation with zebras.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And I learnt about the spoons, which is, again, with chronic ill people, you talk about how many spoons have you got. And it was a way of measuring your energy and your activity for a day. So have you got 5 spoons? And then what are you going to spend those 5 spoons doing? If you get up and go to the bathroom, is that 1, 2 or 3 spoons? Right. If you have a visitor for 10 minutes, is that 10 spoons, which means you've used 2 days? And so you start looking at everything, just like when I was an art student and everything was measured in loaves of bread, so if you went out to a nightclub and it was £2 to get in, you'd think, oh my gosh, that's 4 loaves of bread, how are we going to survive? And so when you're ill, or when I was ill, there was this spoons thing.
Okay.
And that was how you would categorise each other as well in the community. But a few years in, so I was claiming, because I'd always been self-employed, and I've never trusted government, I paid for private health insurance, a really all bells on whistles, critical illness cover, everything. And I thought, oh, well, I can claim on that. And they wouldn't pay out. I fought it for 2.5 years. And the reason was because the NICE guidelines say that if you have ME, you can have CBT or GET, and therefore you'd be cured and you wouldn't be ill. And they classify it as a somatic condition, which means that you're not eligible for life insurance.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a real challenge for me. And imagining how ill I am and just trying to fill in DLA forms. My husband was working, so I wasn't qualifying for many benefits, but you get the disability living allowance, which would then pay for my carers. And trying to do those forms, you've got like 35 pages.
Yeah.
And you've got to think negatively. So your carers, when they're helping you, they're going, I know you've been able to sit up in bed today and you've been able to eat. But think of the days when you've passed out on the bathroom floor. Think of the days when you're shaking or you are just too ill and you're in so much pain. That's how you've got to fill in the form. But the judgment comes in, because if I'm pushed out in a wheelchair and sat watching my kids at their final assembly and looking healthy because I've got Ehlers-Danlos, so I've got lovely smooth skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you look really healthy. And then you get the judgments. And so you're constantly, and this is the key thing about chronic illness, is when you are chronically ill, you're constantly looking at your symptoms, because you want to be able to go to your doctor and go, oh, I've got this particular symptom, I've got this pain, I've got this niggle, there's this, something has happened. And then you're waiting for the doctor to go, oh, I know what it is, here's the magic pill.
Yes.
And with ME, there's no magic pills, because they don't know exactly what it is, and they're not looking at you as a whole being. So luckily, because my husband was working and because I still had a bit of money left from my art business, I had all these private tests, and that's when we started to look down and find that I was exhibiting the results of chemical poisoning. And I had done up an old factory building, so there was quite likely quite a lot of toxins in there. Although even then we decorated it all with ECOS paint, we'd use. So I'd been really aware about toxins for such a long time. But it seemed that this particular doctor was saying that my mitochondria were being blocked by chlorinated phenols. And I remember showing my GP these results, and he said, mitochondria, oh, that's all new age science.
What?
I know.
Basic cell biology.
I know. But just using the word, who was I to use a word like mitochondria? And of course, it rhymes with hypochondria, which you're feeling as a
Oh, for goodness' sake, I'd never even clicked that together.
No, I mean, you become hypersensitive to every possible judgment for why you are not contributing to society. And then the thing was claiming on the insurance, to claim your life insurance because you can no longer work, you have to show that you would never be able to work. And that's a really negative thing. And because I was an artist, and possibly because I was a female artist and of my age and a mum, there was this regular conversation about, but Mrs. Carnell, what if one day you decide to paint again? You find you can paint and you have a little exhibition in the local village hall. And it's like, you're not seeing who I was. I exhibited in New York. I exhibited in London. I exhibited in Santa Fe. I was a professional artist. I had a gallery. I had a publishing business. And it was really annoying, because I think, well, what if I was a man? Or what if I was a pilot and then couldn't work? Who is making these decisions? And this guy, I only ever spoke to him on the phone, but I would picture in the film The Incredibles, the little man with the big desk.
Yeah.
So when I'd be on the phone, I'd picture this little man who was doing whatever he could to not pay out my insurance, which could have really transformed my health. But I kept fighting. And eventually I started finding research papers, and my mum was helping me with this. And I found that Dr. Byron Hyde had visited the UK government in 2009 and from Canada, and he had done a review on ME, and he'd assessed all these different patients. And it was about the same time they did the trial for graded exercise therapy, which then became, the recommended treatment. And he claimed that 65% of people in Britain who were diagnosed with ME actually had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and therefore could be treated in some way, or at least treated differently to prevent the symptoms getting worse. And so I had this nugget. And when I looked through the list of Ehlers-Danlos, growing up with asthma, the joint pains, the skin, the hypermobility, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my life history. So, but then it was another 2.5 years before I could even get to see a rheumatologist, because my rheumatologist had passed away. And I had to go through a rheumatologist to then get a referral to go and see a geneticist. And then when we saw the geneticist, and he let me lay on the floor for the appointment because I could not sit in the chair, and he had students with them, and he had read my whole medical history, and he looked at me and he said, oh, Mrs. Carnell, he said, I'm so sorry you've had to wait this long. He said, you are an absolute classic example of Ehlers-Danlos. And he said, no wonder you've been so ill. And he said, you must have been going through hell. And to be heard.
I bet that was so emotional.
It was. I mean, my mum and I, when we came out, we cried. We cried because he was so nice and he heard us. And I no longer had to search for another symptom. It was amazing. But then it was also quite chilling because he said, you're really advanced. There's nothing else we can do. I can't see you ever walking again. And to be quite honest, I think you'll be dead by 50. And I was 46.
Oh, that's a bitter pill.
It was. And then he said, unfortunately, it's worse for women. Have you got daughters? And I said, no, I've got sons. So we'd gone to Exeter. My mum had taken me down and we came out of our appointment with him and we both just hugged and cried because the rheumatologist we'd seen before in Taunton, she was awful, absolutely awful. I was really judged by her. And my mum even had a real talking to her and she said, you've got no idea who my daughter was, what she used to do. And that rheumatologist said, she did, there's a mobility test they do and I was 9 out of 9. And she said, I don't see why you're looking for another diagnosis. It's worse than the one you've already got. And it was like, well, I just want to know.
Yeah.
If I know what's happening with my body, I can then work with it. And what I'd been doing through all of this fighting and research was I'd been following a herbalist who was in Dorset. And by divine intervention, synchronicity, coincidence, she moved from Dorset, where it was too far for me to travel, even though it was, like 40 minutes away. She moved into my town and opened a clinic.
Whoa.
So once I had that diagnosis, I phoned her up and said, right, I need to come and see you. I stayed with my mum for a few days because I needed to grieve. I had to grieve the fact that I really was ill after having years of being treated as if it was all in my mind and I wasn't really ill. And then, and it was upsetting because my boys were really worried. It's like, how honest do you be with them? And what if they have daughters? It's looking at all of that. And my eldest was applying to go into the military, and my husband's military, quite a few of our family are military, and I know about the importance of physical fitness. And the military has a really good sense of humour, a real dark humour, which I get and I don't take offence at. But I knew that if I took my son to an interview with him pushing me in a wheelchair, it would have an impact on him joining. So my goal was to be able to walk with an umbrella so I could be a crazy artist mum instead of, somebody with walking sticks. So my mum bought me this beautiful frilly umbrella so I could walk around with an umbrella. And I did. I got to take him to his interview and with an umbrella. But I've made an appointment to go and see this herbalist, and I went to see her and proudly with my diagnosis. And I said, I've got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and I want you to heal me. And she went, first of all, she goes, I don't care what your diagnosis is. She goes, I'm not treating a symptom or a label, I'm treating you. And then she said, second thing is, I'm not going to heal you. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd waited 3 months and it was £90 for a 2-hour initial consultation. And she's not going to fix me. And she said, you're going to heal yourself, but I'm going to give you the tools. And that was such a shock. And I was so angry about the diagnosis thing because I had fought so hard to get that diagnosis.
Yeah. And then it was just like, not bothered.
Yeah. And now I completely understand it and I completely get it. And I can see how we become attached to our labels. And I get triggered by all these excuses in all walks of life of I can or I can't do that because of my.
Please, don't get me started.
And this is where the bees come in, because I was treated for 8 months with this herbalist, Lucy Jones, Morobalin Clinic down in Dorset. And interestingly, she's moved her clinic again. So it was almost like she came in to heal me and then moved away again, or to help me heal. She also inspired me so much that I started my own training to be a medical herbalist. So that was 10 years ago. I'm still studying. It's so comprehensive. And so I got the medical herbs. But 2 years into being ill, my husband had bought me a beehive, because one of the things that I learned early on, so I had the nausea, and that was the only bit of chemical medicine I'd had for like 20 years. So I wouldn't ever take paracetamol and things anyway, because from the age of 19, when I had the asthma, I then went to a herbalist because I started to pass out. So at 19, at art school, I was passing out. And I'd gone to a GP and said, this is happening. And they went, oh, yeah, well, of course it is. You've been on these steroids all your life for this asthma. So you either get used to passing out or you die of an asthma attack. And I was like, okay, I'm 19. I won't accept that. So I would have gone to anybody. I would have gone to a witch doctor. I would have done anything. I would have stood naked in a fire pit and had people chant around me. I would have done anything because I was not happy with that. And luckily, a friend whose mum was a herbalist, a medical herbalist, really well known, Janet Kippax, who's since passed away. And her son was training to be a herbalist and a Chinese practitioner and a homeopath.
Wonderful.
So he took me on as a case study, and he got me off all of my asthma drugs. So from that point, I didn't take any chemical medicine. And I had these lovely hand-typed out printed sheets in multicoloured paper that his mum had composed of basic home remedies, so onion poultices, garlic on the feet, what to do if you have fever, all these things. And I've still got them. They're just amazing piece of wisdom. So from that point, I hadn't taken anything. So then when I fall ill at 40 and I have this nausea and really, really severe pain, I was thinking, okay, what can I do? And they gave me this nausea tablet that you could put underneath your gum. So I took that and it seemed to work, just took the edge off. And then I ran out. So my mum had gone down, got another prescription and came back and she said, oh, they've changed the prescription. Don't know why, but it's something else. I mean, my mum, luckily, she would see these things. And I took this one tablet and oh my gosh, it took me to hell. It was, I don't know what it was or what it did, but I just dramatically went downhill, got even worse than I'd ever been before. And it was like, this is awful. So then mum, in desperation, went to the chemist and got those wristbands with the little pulse things in. And we put them on and it took a while, but they ended up being my lifesaver and they really did help manage the nausea. So, don't even go with any kind of chemical medicine, have those. So that was the only medicine. And then to transport me, I had some kind of tranquilizer tablet that they would let me take because we'd go and visit family that would be 2 or 3 hours away in the car. And there was no way I could travel. It would knock me out for weeks. So by tranquilizing me, I could relax in the car because I was so jumpy. I was in a complete state of fight or flight. So if one of my carers was carrying a pile of towels into the bedroom to put them on the end of my bed, for instance, and I would see one of the towels was going to fall off and I could see it and it would happen in slow motion. When it came off, I would still jump out of my skin with a towel.
Wow.
I was that wound up. So the herbalist, 8 months with her, she had me out of the wheelchair, walking with sticks, with umbrellas. And I had 2 months then with no herbal medication and nothing, just, really feeling good. And because I had the Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis, I was then able to have physio and I saw the feet people. What are they?
Podiatrists.
Yes. But is it an orthodontist? No. There's a funny word for podiatrist that isn't podiatry. And I can't remember what it was. Anyway, a podiatrist.
Podiatrist. Yeah.
So they looked at my feet and said it was basically a bag of skin filled with a jangle of bones.
Nice.
Yeah. so they gave me all these things to put in my shoes so that I could walk a bit. And of course, I hadn't walked for years, so that took some time. And I then had a couple of months where I was walking around the house. I could make my own cups of tea. I reduced all the care. So I would just have a bit of help just to keep on top of. I by then had 3 boys because my stepson moved in with us whilst I was ill. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I can be a friend. And it was understanding the value of who I am. So I had been attached to being the gallery owner, the artist, the businesswoman. And then I had nothing for 7 years. I was nothing. I couldn't really be a wife or a mother or daughter. Couldn't really do anything. I was very, very incapable, invalid, as we think. And I had to learn to have value with just being me. And one of the things I used to do was a pop-up coffee morning once a month where I'd invite my friends and I could bake some cakes, and it would be a Wednesday morning for 2 hours where anyone that wanted to visit me could just drop in. And then I could see everybody just in that time. Then I could be in bed all afternoon and rest. And so I would do that. And realising that I had value as a friend because I'd become a really good listener.
Yes, I bet, yeah.
Because people could sit on the bed and they could talk. And I had nothing else to complicate their problems. You know, I didn't have to say, oh, I got to do this, or I got to do that, or what shall I do? It was like I could just listen. So I realised I could be valuable just as me. So that was very powerful. 2 years into being ill, my husband had built me a beehive because to cope with the pain, to cope with the trauma and the nausea, and having done yoga for about 20 odd years before I was ill, I knew how to meditate and I knew yoga lessons off by heart. So I would lay in bed and visualize the whole yoga class. And, you know, I'd look at the clock and I'd think, okay, I've got an hour yoga session. So we're going to start with a bit of a warm up. And then, you know, I'd do the sun salutations and do all this. And I'd do the lovely rest at the end. And the other thing I would do was visualize about what I would do if I was well. I would try and think about things. And I'd think about the walks I used to do that I knew would take half an hour or 2 hours. And I would visualize them. And it was amazing that the south coast of Dorset, the coast path, I had done a lot because before I was ill, I'd walked the Inca Trail and I'd, you know, trained there. So I was really familiar with that walk. And as you do a walk, you know, perhaps walking from the car into the studio, if I was to say to you how many windows were on the building or how many cars were parked or, you know, what was behind you or who else was getting tickets, you wouldn't think you could remember. You'd go, oh, I don't know. I think we're the last 2 windows and perhaps we passed 6 windows and I think there's 3 floors. But what's incredible is when you really, really have nothing else to distract you and you go back in time and you rerun that pulling into the car park and getting your ticket and looking at the building and talking about the dates of when the building was built, and then walking up, you realise that your brain took every single bit of that in. But we don't have that time to acknowledge it, but it's all gone in. And so with the pause, you can relive it. So through my 7 years, I relived everything that had happened in my life. And I relived it with the traumas, with the pain of divorce, you know, giving birth, miscarriages, all these things. I lived through them. But then I would also visualize what I would like to see, what I would like to live through. And one of the things that I always thought I would do one day is keep bees. And 2 years in, it was my birthday. And of course, I couldn't have a party and we couldn't really go out anywhere. And my husband was saying, what would you like for your birthday? And I just said, I need a beehive. And he's like, why do you want a beehive? You know, you can't get outside. You haven't got any bees, you know. Why would you have an empty beehive? And I'm like, I can't have bees till I've got a beehive. So he, bless him, he bought a flat pack beehive and built it and gave it to me for my birthday. And then through another whole crazy series of synchronicities, a local beekeeper put bees in and taught me beekeeping. And 3 years in, we had our first harvest of honey. We had 140 pounds of honey from one hive, which I didn't know if that was good. But bear in mind, you'd be lucky now to get 40 pounds of honey from any hive. So it was really good. And he'd said he'd never known such a happy hive. He'd never known such calm bees and all the rest of it. So we took the honey out, we split it 50-50. So I had 70 jars of honey and I felt like a proper beekeeper. And I was thinking, I've got all this honey that I can now give as Christmas presents because I wasn't earning anything. So it was like, wow, I've now got this. And then the next week he came up and he had this big brown parcel. And I'm like, oh, what are we going to do this week? And he said, oh, this is for the bees. We've got to feed them. And I'm like, what do you mean you've got to feed the bees? And he said, well, we've taken all their honey. So I said, well, what are we going to feed them? And he had a block of white sugar fondant. And every part of my body was like, no. And I couldn't believe what we'd done. And I couldn't believe I hadn't realised what we'd done. We'd taken the bees' food and left them with nothing and then had to feed them this sugar. And I just knew it was wrong. And I was like, we can't do this. And he said, well, they'll starve if we don't feed them. And of course, all the honey was now in jars. So we could, there are ways of giving bees back honey, but at that time I didn't know it. And I was just torn and devastated. And I was thinking, this is wrong, but how do I explain it's wrong? So then I would contemplate this. And at that stage, with 3 little boys running around the house, and me in bed, I knew that you don't give kids sugar because they're just going to run around even more and get all hyped up, and then there'll be fights and arguments and then tears. So I knew sugar was bad. And then I was thinking, gosh, imagine giving your children white sugar from August, when you've taken the honey off, to April, when the dandelions come out. Imagine feeding only white sugar to any living being. They're not going to be healthy, are they? No wonder the bees are dying. So that was when I started to really look into bees. And then what was interesting was all the studies and all the research on bees and bee health, far more than is done on humans. Oh, wow. So I'd got better with the herbal medicine. I had my bees. I was taking my honey, and by now, the bees were handed over to me. So we weren't using any chemical treatments. I wasn't feeding them any sugar. I was taking a lot less honey. And I had 2 months with no medication, nothing, and feeling really, really happy and doing my pop-up coffee mornings and didn't have so many carers. I'd been given a blue badge for life because of my condition. So I could drive right up to the local deli, park outside and go in, feeling judged, feeling that everyone was going, she's just walked into the shop and parked outside with a blue badge. Not realising that for me, that was huge.
Yes.
I'd been able to walk around that whole shop with a walking stick, but I'd been able to walk round. Whereas if I had to park in the car park, I wouldn't have even got to the deli. Yeah. That would have used up my spoons. That would have used up all my energy. So I had this blue badge. And then 2 months in, my mum said, oh, I found these minerals. And she'd been taking these mineral tablets. And I'd noticed an improvement in her health, in her memory, in her energy. And I was really sceptical about any medication. And I was even more sceptical about supplements because of when I was a teenager, friends had worked for mobile toilet companies. And 2 different friends who worked for 2 different companies had both in passing mentioned this crazy thing about mobile toilets that, at festivals, we live near Glastonbury, so it was a good teenage job, not one I ever chose to do. But there would be these mountains of supplements that had passed right through people's bodies. And I'd said to them, how do you know they're supplements? And they said, they've still got the brand names written on them.
Oh.
So I knew all my adult life that supplements are a waste of time because they go right through the body. So my mum says, oh, I've got these mineral tablets and they're really helping. And I'm like, well, no, they're just going right through you. They won't be absorbed. And then she had some leaflets and it was talking about plant-based minerals. So I'm like, oh, okay, so what's the difference? And of course, we're not taught the difference. So the minerals, the rock minerals, are in the soil, and the plants use their roots to break down these rocks, process them through the stems, And then you have a plant-based mineral, a form of that mineral in the plant. And then we eat the plants and we get the minerals. Now, this is great if your soil has got lots of minerals in, but with modern agriculture, it doesn't. The soil's depleted. So the minerals aren't in the plants, any plants. And so we're depleted. And then I thought, oh my gosh, if we're depleted, the bees are too, because the bees aren't going to get it in their nectar. So I started taking these minerals, and it was like somebody had flipped a switch.
Wonderful.
And I would walk somewhere and realise I'd forgotten to bring my stick. And then I thought, I can't live with myself with a blue badge and all that restriction and labelling and attachment to being ill. I need to test if I'm really well. So that's when Greg and we walked from Weymouth to Swanage in 3 days. The Dorset Coast Path, which is tough. I have since walked in the Himalayas, and I've done the Inca Trail, and the Dorset Coast Path is up there. It is tough.
Wow.
It's chalk, it's rubbly, it's really steep. It's quite relentless for parts. And we did it. And as soon as we came home, I sent back my blue badge and ended my DLA,
chapter.
everything. I'm well. I am now a well person. And started my new life. And then it was like, what do I do?
Yes.
Because we don't have an environment for convalescence. We don't.
No, you're either ill or you're back at work.
Yeah.
No in between.
No. And it's really tough. And I'd always been self-employed, so I was unemployable. And then what happened when I did my walk and I shared it in the Ehlers-Danlos and the ME forums, I got abused and attacked because I obviously can't really have been ill.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Because they'd been told, if you've got Ehlers-Danlos, you will never walk again. If you've got ME and you're part of the 25% who are bedbound, then you've really got myalgic encephalomyelitis and you're dying. And so I was ostracised from that whole community who'd been my friends for the 7 years. And then not one of the doctors, not even my own doctor, or the geneticist, or the rheumatologist asked how I'd got better. It's like the elephant in the room. Suddenly I'm well, I'm going out socially, seeing all these people, and no one who knows about medicine is saying, oh my gosh, how did you do that?
Yeah. How can we reproduce this to help all these others? I mean, that's what's popping into my mind as well.
I know, because we need hope. You know, if I was just repeatedly told there was no hope and I'd be dying, and it was only my strong mind and refusal to believe that and accept that I would find a way out.
So the bees, which is what you're focusing on now and what fills your life, were an integral part of your healing.
Yeah, because what I didn't realise is when you're in the presence of bees, they raise your vibration. Their vibration is 256 hertz. So they're resonating at the vibration of presence. And when you are present, you can't be in a hyper state of alert. You can't be depressed. You can't be fearing the future or the past. You are present. And the more time you spend being present, your body can heal. So just being present with the bees and spending time with the bees, unbeknownst to me, was healing me. So we all think of honey as medicine, which it is, and the propolis, and, you know, then you've got pollen, royal jelly, you know, venom, all these things. I mean, I was being stung, so I had that medicine as well. So yeah, the bees were a really integral part. But it's only in more recent years that I can look back and see that.
Of course.
For me, the part the bees played was all the scientific research on what is killing bees. All of it, so much of it, about the impact of pesticides, the impact of EMF radiation, the impact of toxic water, of a bad environment, of beekeeping being so damaging for bees, of the movement, of the connection with the land. All of this is so important. And so I began reading the science to try and convince my local beekeepers to stop feeding their bees sugar and to stop putting chemicals in the hive. And because they wouldn't believe me, because I'm just some silly middle-aged woman who's only just taken up beekeeping, I searched for the science.
Yeah, to back you up. And
yeah. And that was really interesting, because the more science I looked up, and then when I started to go to the big international bee conferences where it's all the scientists presenting their latest research, I realised that they were all completely on side with me. You know, there's a great German scientist whose name has just suddenly escaped me. And he's the head of Colos, which is a big international association of bee scientists, which studies why bees are dying. And his strapline is, bees are the biggest risk, beekeepers is the biggest risk to bees, which you can imagine is very challenging, because beekeepers love their bees and they, they think they're doing what's best for them. But the modern way of beekeeping, and particularly the modern way of treating disease, is having an impact. We're using chemicals that are trying to kill an insect on an insect. And so you're bound to get collateral damage. And then when you see the instructions of some of the chemicals you put in, and you've got beekeepers with gas masks on and full hazmat suits to apply medicine into a living hive. And then,
that's just all kinds of wrong, isn't it?
It is all kinds of wrong. But because everybody does it, everybody feeds sugar, everybody uses smoke, everybody, does all these things, everybody puts chemicals in, because otherwise your bees will die from varroa. It's a big thing to change. So I was ostracised from the ill community, and then I was ostracised from the British beekeeping community, because I'm some crazy woman who's got these crazy ideas, who knows nothing about beekeeping. And I was really blessed that to try and earn a living and to avoid getting a job, I did another pop-up Paula. I had a market stall where I would sell my honey, I would sell my herbal teas I was mixing, and the minerals. So the minerals is a network marketing company, and they were inviting me to speak, to share my story, to, so that other people selling the minerals could share my story. So I was doing a lot of public speaking with that, which I really loved. And it was great because a lot of people in that community had found the minerals had helped them through illness. So I was earning, a few pence every time somebody else bought some minerals, but it wasn't, certainly wasn't going to pay a mortgage off. And so I had this pop-up market stall with the minerals, with the herbal teas. My husband was a cider maker, or is a cider maker, and so I had his cider and I had his apple juice. And then I had this chap come one day who just happened to have bought the big estate down the road from us, and big as in, a stately home estate.
Okay, yeah.
And we all knew somebody had bought it, and there was fences all the way around, and we were all curious about what was going to go on, and there was all these rumours about it being film stars who'd bought it. And then I have this chap, and he wants to buy some honey, which I had under the counter because I didn't have much, and it was like really for my special people who would appreciate it. And I hadn't seen him around before, so I suppose I was a bit rude, and I just said, where do you live? And he said, Hadspen. And I said, oh, that's a nice little village. And it's doesn't even have a church, so it's a tiny village, about 10 or 11 houses. And I said, so which house are you in then? Because I've got friends in Hadspen, so which house are you in? And he said, the house. And I was like, oh, you've bought the Hadspen estate. And he had. So he said, I've planted an orchard, which was a bit of an understatement because there was like 3,000 trees that we could all see from the road. And he said, so I've been thinking about bees. He said, would you come up and have a look? So I said, yeah, okay, because I was nosy and I wanted to see, and nobody was going behind the fences. So it was like,
to have gone. Yeah.
Oh, I know. So I went, and I had a tour, and they said what they were planning to do. They were going to do this hotel and this big gardens, but it was all about education, really about education. And then they said, so I met the architect and the head gardener, and they said, what could we do with bees? So I went away and I wrote a massive document, I think it's like 26 pages, of what I would do with bees if money was no object, if I had the space and I could do what I believe. So I sent it in and just thought, what have I got to lose? And I got this email back going, great, will you do it?
Wonderful.
So I took that contract on, and that became the Newt in Somerset. But I had 2 years before it was open to the public. So for 2 years, I had to work secretly about what I was doing. I couldn't tell anybody. So in the summer, I would work with the bees, and I put into practice everything I believed in. So I wasn't going to move any bees in. I dowsed the estate for the energetic points where the bees would thrive. And then I put hives in trees on those points. And then the swarms moved in.
Wonderful.
And then the next year, swarms from those I caught and put into hives. And then I was lucky enough that we did a bee museum, the Byzantium, and I was just given free range. So I had to do all the content for that. But that was great because everything in that museum had to be backed up by science. So all the crazy stuff I knew in my heart, in my soul, I knew I had to have evidence for. And some of it was so difficult to find because you find there's these things that everyone knows about bees. For instance, everyone says that Einstein said, if we lose the bees, we've got 4 years left to live. And it's repeated everywhere. And everyone goes, oh yeah, Einstein said that. But Einstein didn't say it. It was also then attributed to Maurice Maeterlinck, who was a beekeeper who wrote an amazing book called The Life of the Bee in about 1920, I think, 1910, 1920. I've got about 4 versions of it. It's an absolutely beautiful book. I've got an illustrated version too. So I'm ashamed to say I can't remember when it was written. But anyway, and he didn't say it either. So I was really curious. It was like, well, who did say it? And it turned out it came out by a French beekeeping group to try and ban neonicotinoids in the 1990s. So it was French farmers and French beekeepers who were saying, if we lose the bees, we've only got 4 years left to live. Now, it's been interpreted that if we lose the bees, who's going to pollinate our food? And therefore, we can only live on non-pollinated food for 4 years, which never made sense to me because I know that birds and beetles and other things pollinate. But also, my question is, well, why are the bees dying? What's killing the bees? And I think that what the French were realising, because they've always had this understanding of the land and food and our health, is that what's killing the bees is also killing us. And we're just big enough that it would take 4 years longer to kill a bigger organism than it would to kill the bees. And that has been my mission, is to help people understand that what is killing the bees is killing us. And my condition, Ehlers-Danlos, a genetic condition, so I was apparently born with it, and I've completely recovered from an unrecoverable genetic condition because I have changed my environment. But not just my physical environment, my internal environment, my mental environment. Every aspect of my life I am now in control of to maintain my health. So the Ehlers-Danlos, it's like this monster on the back of your shoulders that if you slip up, it can get a hold again. And this is what I've learned from the bees. And so with my bees and with the bees I work with, I do whatever I can with the environment that those bees are in to clean it up so that those bees can be healthy.
I love it. What a fabulous story.
Did I take a breath?
I got a few words in, but it's not about me. It's about you and your story. And it's just wonderful. And I'm really grateful to you for travelling all the way up here from Somerset to come and share it with us.
Thank you.
It's been a complete delight.
It's been a delight to be able to share it. There's so many aspects that I share in different places, but each time I share it at length, there's a new insight. And it connects even more with the bees because the bees show us everything is connected. And then you just see how everything that is awful at the time, awful, really bad, is a gift and it's a lesson and it's a learning. And then what a gift, because then you really learn it, you really understand it. And who can argue with that?
Yeah. What a fabulous insight. I'm sure people are going to be blown away.
Well, I hope they'll be inspired.
Yeah.
Because we've all got it within us.
Yeah. And that's what we need to learn, isn't it? That we have the capability to heal ourselves, given the right tools to do it.
Yeah.
The body can.
It wants to.
Yeah.
Just like the bees, they want to be well.
Yeah.
And that's all they're trying to tell us. They're doing a massive slap round the chops going, look at what you're doing to us. You're doing it to yourselves as well.
That's wonderful. Lovely message. Thank you, my darling.
Thank you. It's been a delight, and it's so lovely to spend time with you.